Could I have some rice, please? Dad, why are you begging? Derek said you stopped sending money. I sent you $3,000 every month.
Where did $68,000 go? Dad gave me authority. I handled it. You said Evan abandoned me. You stole his money and his home.
You were hungry while I kept sending money.
I thought you didn't need me anymore. Dad, I should have come home sooner. You came home. Now stay with me.
He almost didn't recognize his father. The man standing at the neighbor's door was thinner than Evan remembered. Shoulders narrowed, the familiar set of his jaw now sharper, more exposed, like something had been quietly worn away. He was holding a small ceramic bowl in both hands, and he was asking. Evan heard it from across the yard, not loud, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry to bother you, Evelyn. Is there any rice left from supper? I know it's late." Evan stood at the end of the driveway, keys still in his hand, and felt something in his chest go very, very still. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It had been 4 months since Evan Holt had driven down Route 12 into Mill Haven, Kentucky, and the town looked exactly the same except for everything that mattered. He had not called ahead. That was unusual for him. Evan Holt was a planner, a man who scheduled things 3 weeks in advance. But something had been nagging at him for the last month and a half, some formless unease he couldn't name. The deposits were going out like clockwork, same as always. $3,000 on the first of every month into the account he'd set up for his father years ago. He never missed. But the last 2 times he'd called his father had seemed distant, in a way that didn't quite match the excuses. Tired, busy, the signal was bad. Evan had told himself it was just age. He was wrong about a lot of things that night. He parked on the street outside the family home, the house his father had built with his own hands in 1984, 2 acres of land just east of the grain cooperative, the kind of place that looked modest and meant everything. He grabbed his bag from the back seat and started up the walk, and that's when he saw the figure at Evelyn Marsh's door. He stopped. His father was holding a ceramic bowl with both hands like something precious or fragile. He was wearing the brown cardigan Evan had given him 4 Christmases ago, but it hung differently now, too wide at the shoulders, bunching at the wrists. He was talking to Evelyn through the screen door, and his voice was so quiet that Evan could only catch fragments. "Sorry to bother you, just a little rice if there's any left. I know it's late." Evan didn't move. He stood at the end of the neighbor's walk and watched his father, this man who had worked construction for 30 years, who had carried lumber up 3 flights of stairs and never asked for help, who had taught Evan that needing something from someone was something you managed carefully and privately, standing at a neighbor's door with an empty bowl asking for food. Evelyn's screen door opened. She took the bowl gently. She looked up and saw Evan standing in the dark at the end of the walk. Her face did something complicated. Wallace turned. He saw his son. And instead of relief, instead of the surprise, the warmth, the "Evan, you're here." What crossed his father's face was something closer to shame. "Son." The word came out quiet, almost small. "Dad." Evan didn't trust himself to say anything else. Evelyn brought them both inside. She made tea without being asked. She sat across from Evan at her kitchen table with her hands folded and told him plainly what she had seen. 8 times in 6 months, maybe more. Wallace appearing at her door in the evening, always with the same bowl, always apologetic, always explaining that things were a little tight right now. She had given him food each time without asking questions, because she knew Wallace's pride. And she didn't want to take more from him by making him explain. "He told me your brother said you'd stopped sending money," Evelyn said. She was watching Evan carefully. "He said you had your own life now, and he didn't want to be a bother to you." Evan set down his cup. He set it down slowly because he did not trust his hands. I send $3,000 every month, he said. First of every month, automatic. I haven't missed once in 4 years. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know that. I think your father knows it too, somewhere. But Derek told him otherwise. And your father didn't know who to believe. He looked across the kitchen at his father. Wallace was sitting with his hands around the mug, not drinking, just holding it. He was looking at the table. Evan thought about the 4 months since his last visit. The 12 months before that. The excuses he'd made to himself: too busy. He's fine, the money is going out. What more can I do from 3 hours away? He thought about what it would take for his father, this specific man with this specific dignity, to stand at a neighbor's door and ask for rice. He thought about how many times that had to have happened before his father stopped being ashamed of it. Dad, he said, I'm going to need you to come with me tonight. Wallace looked up. He didn't argue. He just nodded like he'd been waiting for someone to say that for a very long time. They drove to the family home first. Evan wanted to look around. He told his father to wait in the car. The house was lit inside. The kitchen had been recently renovated, new appliances, quartz countertop, a dishwasher that hadn't been there 4 months ago. The bathroom tile was new. Derek's truck was in the driveway, and a second car, a late model SUV, was parked alongside it. Evan walked down the hallway to his father's room. The mattress was thin and old. There was no lamp, only an overhead bulb. An empty glass sat on the nightstand. And on the outside of the pantry door at the end of the hall, there was a padlock. A brand new padlock, the kind you buy at a hardware store, latched to the outside of the door of a man's own kitchen. Evan stood in the hallway and looked at it for a long time. Then he walked back out to the car, got in, and drove his father to the motel on the edge of town without saying a word. The motel on Route 12 was called the Mill Haven Motor Inn, and it had not been updated since 1997. The carpet was thin, the air conditioner rattled, and the lamp between the 2 beds flickered whenever a truck passed on the highway outside. But the diner across the street was open until midnight, and when Evan brought his father a full plate pork chops, mashed potatoes, green beans, a side of cornbread, Wallace ate 3 helpings without stopping. Evan watched him eat and did not say anything for a long time. His father had always been a big man, not in height, but in presence, the kind of person who took up space not by intention, but by the simple weight of having been somewhere for decades. He had worked construction and then carpentry, and then odd jobs around Millhaven until his knees gave out 2 years ago. He had been solid and capable and quietly proud in the way of men who built things with their hands and needed no one to tell them they'd done it right. The man across the table now was thinner by 30 pounds easy. His wrists resting on the edge of the plate were narrow in a way that made Evan think of birds. Dad, he said, finally. When did you last have a meal like this? Wallace swallowed, set down his fork. He thought about it with his eyes on the table. Evelyn made soup last Tuesday, he said. I brought cornbread. Before that, Derek brought something from the grocery. I'm not sure what day. And Sandra, does she cook? Something moved across his father's face. She cooks for Derek, he said carefully. I usually have something separate. Evan nodded and said nothing. He picked up his coffee and held it and waited. I know you sent money, Wallace said suddenly. Not loud, but with a deliberateness that made it clear he had been turning it over for some time. I know you did. I went to the bank once about 8 months ago. I asked Linda to show me the account. She pulled it up and I could see the deposits. Every month. 3,000. He paused. I went home and asked Derek about it. He said the account I saw was the old one. That you'd changed the transfer 2 years ago to a family account he manages. He said it was more efficient. He told you I authorized that. He told me you thought it was better for him to handle things. Wallace's voice was even. He was not asking for sympathy. He was simply placing the facts on the table between them. So I believed him. And then the food started getting less and less, and Sandra said they were having some financial difficulties. And I didn't want to complain because Derek had been there and you hadn't. And I thought he stopped. Pressed his lips together. I thought maybe I just misunderstood what the arrangement was supposed to be. Evan set down the coffee. He said, "You never misunderstood anything." His father looked at him for a moment, then looked back at the plate. In the morning, Evan drove back to the family home. Derek's truck was gone and Sandra's SUV was there. He knocked. She answered in the doorway, her posture arranged into something designed to look casual. "Evan." She smiled. "I didn't know you were back. How long are you staying? I need to talk to you and Derek about some things." "Of course. Come in." She stepped back. "Derek's at work, but maybe tonight I'll wait." He stepped inside. "I want to look around first." Sandra's smile stayed in place, but something shifted behind it. "Of course. Make yourself at home. You know where everything is." He did. He walked through the kitchen, slowly, new appliances, the countertop, the tile. He walked through the living room, new sectional sofa, a television that was 40 inches wider than the one he remembered. He walked down the hall to his father's room and looked at the thin mattress, the bare nightstand, the empty small refrigerator in the corner that had not been plugged in. Then he walked back to the hallway and stood in front of the pantry door and looked at the padlock. Sandra had followed him. She was standing in the doorway to the hall. "It's for organization," she said. "Your father has a tendency to leave things out, and it attracts pests." Evan turned and looked at her. "Where are his woodworking tools in storage?" "Which storage? A unit we rented. There wasn't room here." "When did that happen? A while ago?" Her smile was losing shape at the edges. "I'm not sure of the exact date." "And his phone, the plan he had, for the last 12 years. When did that change?" "We updated the plan. Added a family account, it was more economical. And the speed dial he had for my number." Sandra said nothing. Evan nodded. "I'm going to need to see the full account history for my father's bank account," he said. "I'm going to need to see the co-signatory paperwork. And I'm going to need to know who authorized the plan change on his phone." He paused. "I'd suggest you be very honest with me right now, because I am going to find out everything regardless, and how you handle the next 24 hours is going to matter." Sandra drew herself up. Her voice was careful and hard. "Your father is an elderly man who needs looking after. We have been here, Evan, every day. You sent checks. That's not the same thing as being present. If there are concerns about how the household has been managed, I suggest you speak with Derek." Evan picked up his keys from the counter. "I intend to," he said. He drove to the local bank branch and asked for Linda at the front desk. Linda had been at that branch for 19 years and had known his father since before Evan was born. She took him into a private office and closed the door and looked at him with the expression of a woman who had been carrying something and was relieved to set it down. "I need to see the full transaction history," he said. 2 years. She pulled it up. He looked at the screen. 12 months of $3,000 deposits. Every single one of them within 48 to 72 hours, followed by ATM withdrawals, not in round numbers, but specific ones. 2,300, 2,750, 2,900, always at the same machine, always 2 towns over. "Who authorized Sandra Holt as co-signatory?" he asked. Linda looked at the file. She looked at the date. Then she looked at Evan. It was signed 11 days after your father's knee replacement, she said. He was still in the recovery period. Evan stared at the date on the screen. He thought about what his father had been like 11 days after major surgery. He thought about the painkillers, the fatigue, the way his father would have trusted his older son standing next to him with a pen. Linda, he said, I need copies of everything, and I need the name of the best elder law attorney in the county. She was already reaching for the printer. Patricia Odoms kept her office on the 4th floor of a brick building in downtown Cincinnati that smelled like old paper and window air conditioning, and she had been practicing elder law for 23 years. She was 51, small, precise in the way of someone who had learned that the most dangerous things were also the most exact, and she looked at Evan across her desk that evening and did not flinch at anything he said. He had driven straight from Millhaven after leaving the bank. 3 hours on the interstate with his bank documents in a manila folder on the passenger seat. His father settled at the motel with a bag of food and a new phone that Evan had purchased at a gas station with a new number only the two of them would know. He laid the documents on Patricia's desk and told her everything. The 8 visits to Evelyn's door, the pantry lock, the phone plan change, the bank records, the ATM withdrawals, the co-signatory addition timed to the surgical recovery period, Sandra's deflections, Derek's absence. Patricia listened without interrupting. She made notes in a spiral binder in a handwriting so small he could not read it from across the desk. When he finished, she set down her pen and looked at him. 2 questions, she said. First, does your father have a power of attorney document, something he may have signed, giving Derek or Sandra authority over his finances or personal care? Evan had not thought to ask that. The omission sat in his chest like a stone. I don't know, he said. We'll need to find out. If they have a valid POA, they have legal cover for some of what you're describing, even if the conduct itself was abusive. If the POA was obtained fraudulently, which given the timing you're describing is very possible, that changes the entire picture. She made another note. Second question, is your father willing to cooperate? His willingness to speak about what he experienced is important. He wants people to know, Evan said. He said as much last night. He's spent 75 years not asking for anything from anyone. That's very common. She nodded. We'll go gently. She told him what she needed: the full transaction records going back as far as Linda could provide, Wallace's medical records from the surgical period, and a cognitive evaluation from a court-recognized specialist. That last part was important and urgent. If Derek decided to claim that Wallace lacked capacity, having a clean evaluation on file early would neutralize the argument before it was made. Say nothing to Derek or Sandra, yet, she said. Not about the attorney, not about the investigation. The moment they know you're building a case, evidence disappears. Sandra already knows I was asking questions at the bank. Then we move quickly. She was already pulling a form from her desk. I'll request the county property records for your father's address tonight. I want to know exactly what that land looks like on paper before we do anything else. It was past 9 o'clock. The Cincinnati traffic was gone, and the building was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. Patricia set up a second monitor and pulled the county assessor's database while Evan sat across from her and watched. He thought about his father eating 3 helpings of pork chops at the motel diner. He thought about the bowl. He thought about 8 months of evenings at Evelyn's door, and his father always saying he was fine, always finding a way to explain the bowl away. I want to understand something, he said. How does a person sustain a lie like this for 2 years? Derek would have had to tell my father every time the subject came up that I stopped sending money. My father would have had to believe it. Over and over for 2 years. Patricia looked up from her screen briefly. Your brother was telling your father that the person he most wanted to call for help had stopped caring about him, she said. That's not just a lie. That's a cage. It worked because your father's love for you made the lie hurt too much to question. She looked back at the screen. It's a very old technique. Evan was quiet. Patricia stopped moving. She turned the second monitor so Evan could see it. There's a second mortgage on your father's property, she said. Her voice was level and careful. Filed 14 months ago. Borrower Wallace Holt. Lender Cornerstone Capital LLC. Principal amount $180,000. Evan looked at the screen. He did not say anything. And here, she scrolled down. Her finger stopped on the screen. A purchase and sale agreement, signed by Derek Holt, acting as authorized agent for Wallace Holt, the property owner. She looked at Evan. Closing date is in 31 days. The room was very quiet. He's selling the land, Evan said. He's trying to. Patricia's voice was even. The question is whether the authority he's claiming as Wallace's authorized agent is legitimate. Which brings us back to the power of attorney. She was already reaching for her phone. I'm filing an emergency motion to halt the sale tonight. We'll sort the rest out in the morning. But Evan. She set down the phone and looked at him steadily. This is bigger than we thought. And we don't have a lot of time. He drove back to Millhaven at midnight. His father was asleep when he let himself into the motel room, the television on low, the new phone on the nightstand beside a glass of water. Evan sat in the chair by the window for a long time and watched his father sleep. Wallace's chest rose and fell with the slow regularity of a man who had worked hard all his life and learned to rest without guilt. Even now, thin and worn and a long way from okay, he slept like a man who had done nothing wrong, because he hadn't. That was the thing that kept Evan sitting in the chair at midnight instead of going to bed. His father had done everything right. He had raised his sons. He had built the house. He had never asked for anything. And someone had used that had built a 2-year scheme on the precise calculation that Wallace Holt would rather suffer quietly than burden anyone with the truth. Evan reached into his bag and pulled out the document copies Linda had given him. He went through them one more time in the thin lamplight. Every withdrawal, every date. 2 years of his father's money moving through an account he'd never been allowed to fully see. He was still sitting there when his father woke up at 5:30, confused to find Evan in the chair. Son, Wallace said. Did you sleep? A little, Evan said. Dad, did anyone ever ask you to sign a power of attorney document? Something that would let Derek make decisions on your behalf? Wallace was quiet for a moment. The question seemed to surface something from a distance. After the knee surgery, he said slowly. Derek brought someone with a notary stamp. He said it was standard paperwork in case I needed help managing things while I was recovering. It was a lot of pages, and I was very tired, and the medication made it hard to read clearly. He paused. I signed where he told me to sign. I thought it was temporary. Evan nodded. Was it not temporary? His father asked. No, Evan said. I don't think it was. Patricia filed the emergency motion before 8 in the morning. By 9, she had confirmation that the property sale had been temporarily halted, pending review of the agent's authorization. The developer's attorney called Evan's phone twice before 10. Evan let both calls go to voicemail. He spent the morning helping his father settle more comfortably into the motel room, a better blanket from the dollar store, a small coffee maker, a bag of groceries from the gas station 2 blocks over. It was not much, but it gave Wallace something familiar. A space that was his arranged the way he wanted it. I need to go back and get some more of your things, Evan said. Clothes. Your reading glasses. Whatever you want. The blue cardigan, Wallace said. It's in the closet. and my address book. Evan drove to the family home mid-morning. Sandra's SUV was there, but the house was quiet. He let himself in with the spare key he had always had. No one had thought to take it from him, and moved quickly. The cardigan in the closet, the address book on the nightstand. He found Wallace's reading glasses on the windowsill and a rosary that had been his mother's hanging from the bedpost. He found the coat hanging on a hook behind the closet door. It was Wallace's old work coat, a dark canvas field jacket he had worn for 15 or 20 years, the kind with deep pockets and a canvas lining that had worn soft over decades. Evan lifted it off the hook, checked the pockets automatically, and felt something under his fingers. He pulled it out. A spiral notebook. Dollar store the kind with the coil binding and the college-ruled pages. The cover was warped from being folded and unfolded, and the pages were dense with his father's handwriting, small and careful. The letters, the consistent size of a man who had never thought of himself as someone worth reading. Evan stood in his father's room and opened it. The first entry was dated 18 months ago. Wallace had written about the weather, and about a neighbor's dog, and about a phone call with his cousin in Harlan County. The entries were brief. They had the quality of a man practicing the habit of documenting things the way some people do when they have no one else to talk to. But within 3 months, the entries changed. October. Sandra put a lock on the pantry today. She says it is for organization. I asked Derek about it, and he said Sandra runs the house now, and I should let her. I did not argue. I never argue. November tried to call Evan 4 times today. Each time it says the call failed. Maybe the signal is bad. Maybe his number changed. Derek said last month that Evan is very busy at work and prefers text messages now. I don't know how to send a text. December. Sandra brought me rice for dinner. I asked if there was something else. She said rice is fine for older people who don't move much. I ate the rice. I am still hungry. The porch light burned out, and I cannot reach the fixture anymore. I did not ask Sandra to replace it, because I did not want to bother her. January. It is my birthday today. I went to the kitchen this morning to make breakfast, and the pantry was locked. I found rice left over from yesterday in a pot on the stove. I made porridge. I ate it alone at the kitchen table. No birthday should pass without something to celebrate. The porridge was still warm. Evan stopped reading. He stood in his father's room with the notebook in his hands, and the porch light that had been burned out since December, and the pantry lock on the door down the hall, and he stood very still for a moment. He kept reading. February. My tools are gone. Sandra said they needed to go into storage because there is not enough room in the garage. I did not ask which storage. They were in the garage for 30 years. I built the back fence with those tools. I built this house with those tools. But I did not argue. March went to Evelyn's tonight. The 3rd time this month. She handed me the bowl without me asking. She just saw my face and she knew. I told her I was fine. She said she knew. We did not talk about it any more than that. I do not want her to worry. April. Derek says Evan sold the back land. I did not know we had back land. I did not know it was gone until Derek mentioned it over dinner like it was something I already knew. I did not ask how much. I did not ask when. I just nodded and finished my rice. I am ashamed to write this. I am very hungry today. I asked Sandra for something other than rice, and she said I eat more than a man my age needs. I said I was still hungry after meals. She said it is probably because I am confusing thirst for hunger. I am not confused. I have been hungry before. This is different. June tried to reach Evan again. Phone says failed. I think Sandra changed something. I don't understand phones. I understand that when you press a name and it says failed every time something is different from before. I'm afraid to say this out loud. I don't want to say it out loud. The last entry was 3 weeks ago. Went to Evelyn's again. I said I was sorry for bothering her. She said I was never a bother. She poured tea and we sat on her porch, and I didn't have to explain anything. On the way home, I thought about Evan. I thought about the kind of man he became. I think he would be very upset if he knew. That is why I didn't call. I didn't want him to be upset. I didn't want to be the reason he stopped enjoying his life. Evan closed the notebook. He sat down on the thin mattress in his father's room and held the notebook in both hands and breathed carefully the way you breathe when you need to stay functional and your body is working against you. His father had written this alone, in this room, with the pantry locked and the phone dead and no one to talk to. And he had written, I didn't want to be the reason he stopped enjoying his life about the son who was 3 hours away, not knowing any of this was happening. He sat there for a while. When he finally moved, he was reaching back into the coat pocket, checking it thoroughly, the way his father had always taught him, and his fingers closed around a piece of paper folded into a small square. He unfolded it. It was a receipt from a pawn shop in the next county, dated 8 months ago. The item listed was a DeWalt power tool set 14 pieces. The condition was noted as excellent, barely used. The seller's name printed at the bottom in the pawn shop's handwriting was Sandra Holt. The amount paid was $900. Evan looked at the receipt for a long time. He thought about the workbench in the garage where those tools had sat for 30 years. He thought about every fence post and cabinet door and repaired step that his father had fixed in this town over the decades. He thought about the look on his father's face when Evan was 9 years old, and Wallace had let him hold the drill for the first time, one hand on his son's, guiding it patient and steady. $900 for the tools his father had built his life with. He folded the receipt and put it in his jacket pocket with the notebook and walked out of the house without looking back at the kitchen or the renovated bathroom or the new sofa in the living room. He drove back to the motel and sat across from his father and placed the notebook on the table between them. I found this, he said. Wallace looked at the notebook for a moment. Then he said, I didn't think anyone would ever read it. Do you want me to put it away? His father was quiet for a moment. I think I wrote it so that someone would. Patricia had the full picture assembled by Friday afternoon. She laid it out on her desk in 4 columns, dates, amounts, documents, and what each item meant legally, and went through it with Evan item by item. The power of attorney had been signed 12 days post-surgery. The notary who stamped it was a woman named Diane Culp, who had lost her notarial commission the following year following a complaint of improper certification. Evan's father had signed on a line that described the document as a durable financial power of attorney with unlimited scope language, no one recovering from surgery on a heavy dose of post-operative pain medication would have understood, let alone requested. The scope of it is significant, Patricia said. Derek was authorized to make any financial decision on your father's behalf. Open accounts, close them, sign contracts, sell property. All of it. And he used that to take out the mortgage. Yes. $180,000 from Cornerstone Capital, a private lending company that specializes in distressed rural properties. The interest rate is 11%. The funds were disbursed directly to an LLC registered in Sandra's name, Holt and Marsh Boutique Holdings, within 48 hours of closing. She paused. Evan, the mortgage has been in default for 4 months. There's a pending foreclosure notice. If the property sale goes through before we challenge the POA, the proceeds would go partly to service the debt, and Derek would pocket the remainder. Evan worked through the arithmetic in his head. The family land was 2 acres in Millhaven, assessed at around $220,000 by county records. The mortgage was $180,000. The pending sale was for $235,000, below what a proper market listing might yield. After the mortgage was paid, roughly $55,000 would remain, and Derek would claim it. "What's the total we're looking at?" he asked. "What did they actually take?" Patricia ran through it. Monthly transfers diverted over 22 months, approximately $66,000. The mortgage proceeds that went to Sandra's business, $180,000. The tools at the pawn shop's price, $900. The phone plan charges to Wallace's account, they were still tallying. "We're somewhere north of $240,000, she said. "Possibly higher once we finish the accounting." Evan thought about his father's worn mattress, the empty refrigerator, the pantry lock. "I need one more thing," he said. His medical records, his cognitive history. Patricia had already requested them. Dr. Alan Carver, who had been Wallace's primary care physician for 11 years, responded within the day. His records showed no diagnosis of dementia, no cognitive impairment screening results below the normal range for a man of Wallace's age. Age-appropriate memory variations noted the kind every 75-year-old develops. Nothing more. "I've booked a neuropsychological evaluation with Dr. Sylvia Crane in Louisville," Patricia said. "She's court-recognized. The appointment is Monday morning. If Derek tries to claim incompetence, we'll have a clean evaluation ready before any hearing." Evan drove his father to Louisville on Monday. Dr. Crane met with Wallace alone for 90 minutes while Evan sat in the waiting room and stared at a magazine he didn't read. When Wallace came out, he looked tired, but dignified. "She asks a lot of questions about dates and presidents," he said. "I told her I never cared much for presidents." Dr. Crane's written assessment arrived 4 days later. No evidence of dementia or clinically significant cognitive impairment. Orientation, memory, and executive function all within expected parameters for a healthy adult male of 75. Patient demonstrated clear recall, appropriate judgment, and consistent reasoning throughout the evaluation. Patricia filed the assessment with the county clerk. That evening, Evan visited the pawn shop in the next county with the receipt from his father's coat. The owner, a man named Gary, with an abundance of caution and a good memory, confirmed Sandra Holt had come in 8 months ago with a set of 14 DeWalt power tools in excellent condition. He had paid her $900. He became very quiet when Evan explained whose tools they were. "Her father who passed away," Gary said. "That's what she told me." "My father is alive," Evan said. "He's staying at the Millhaven Motor Inn." Gary pulled the tools from the back without being asked. He stacked them carefully on the counter, all 14 pieces clean, and stored properly, the carrying cases intact. He said he would not accept payment. He said, "Can I bring them to him? I'd rather bring them to him myself if that's okay." Evan said yes. He stopped at the county courthouse on the way home and pulled the chain of title for the family property himself. The land had been in Wallace's name since 1984, bought with 40 years of saved wages paid off in 1998. No prior liens, no prior transfers. Until 14 months ago, when the mortgage appeared in the records under Derek's signature as Wallace's authorized agent. He sat in the courthouse parking lot for a while, going through the documents. He thought about the house his father had built with his own hands. He thought about the February diary entry, "I built this house with those tools." He thought about his father not knowing the backland had been sold until Derek mentioned it casually over dinner. He pulled out his phone and called Derek. Derek picked up on the third ring. He sounded cautious. Evan. I've been going through things, Evan said. The bank records, the POA, the property records. I know about the mortgage. I know about the sale. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Things were more complicated than you understand from the outside." "Tell me then." "I've been here," Derek said, "for 3 years. Dad's health problems, the maintenance on that house, the financial strain. You have no idea what it takes to manage that from close up. You sent checks. That's easy. What I've been doing is not easy. You locked up his food." A pause. "That's not Dad gets confused about what he's eaten. He was overconsumption. You sold his tools." Silence. "You told him I stopped caring about him." Evan's voice was steady. "You told him that for 2 years every time he asked about me. You let him believe he was alone." Derek didn't answer. "I need you to understand something," Evan said. "I'm not asking you to explain yourself to me. I'm telling you how this is going to go. I've hired an attorney. She's building a case. The property sale has been halted. What happens next is going to be determined by what you and Sandra choose to do in the next 72 hours. He paused. "I suggest you get legal representation." He hung up before Derek could say anything. Then he sat in the parking lot and looked at the county courthouse until the lights inside went off for the night. 2 days after Evan's call, a process server appeared at the motel room door at 7 in the morning. Wallace was still in bed. Evan signed for the envelope at the door, took it outside, and stood in the parking lot to read it. Derek had filed an emergency petition for legal guardianship of Wallace Holt. The petition alleged a pattern of cognitive decline and increasing susceptibility to undue influence from a recently arrived family member. It cited Wallace's documented history of confusion and his vulnerability to manipulation by individuals with a financial interest in his estate. The petition named Evan by name. It asked the court to appoint Derek as Wallace's legal guardian, giving him full authority over Wallace's person and finances, pending a formal competency hearing. Evan called Patricia before he had finished reading the last page. They filed through the same attorney who notarized the fraudulent POA, she said, when he described the signature at the bottom of the petition. "That's a conflict of interest. We'll challenge it immediately." Her voice was even and fast. "I also received notification this morning that Sandra filed an adult protective services complaint. She's claiming you're disrupting Wallace's established care arrangement, creating emotional distress and exerting financial pressure on an elderly man." Evan looked out across the motel parking lot. A truck was pulling in at the far end. The morning was gray. "Can they do that?" "Anyone can file a complaint. The APS worker will visit Wallace. We need to make sure he's prepared, not coached, but prepared. He understands what's happening, why it matters that he be honest and clear." A pause. "And we need Dr. Crane's evaluation filed with the court this morning before the guardianship petition reaches the clerk's office." The APS worker arrived that afternoon. She was young and careful, and asked Wallace questions in the motel room while Evan waited outside on the bench by the vending machines. The interview lasted 40 minutes. When she came out, she was professional and neutral, and told Evan she would be submitting her report within the week. What she didn't tell him, what Evan only found out later, was that Sandra had visited the motel while Evan was getting lunch. She had come to Wallace directly. She had told him that Derek was worried that Evan was trying to take control of his finances and his property, that Evan had plans to put him in a facility in Cincinnati where he wouldn't know anyone. She had been warm and careful, and she had planted exactly the seeds she intended. When the APS worker arrived 2 hours later, Wallace had been carrying those seeds for 2 hours. That evening, Evan came back to find his father sitting in the chair by the window, not watching television, looking at his hands. "Did Derek come today?" Evan asked. Sandra Wallace said, She came this afternoon. Evan sat down on the edge of the bed. What did she say? Wallace was quiet for a moment. He was still looking at his hands. She said you want to sell the house. That you want to manage everything from Cincinnati and put me somewhere closer to you. A pause. She said Derek is the one who's been here. That he loves me. That whatever he did it because he was trying to hold everything together when you were gone. Evan said nothing. I don't know what to believe, his father said quietly. I know what I've seen. I know what I wrote in that notebook. But Derek is my son, too. He's been in the same town as me for 20 years. He brought me soup when I had the flu. He was at the hospital for my surgery. He looked up at Evan. It's complicated. I know it is. I'm not asking you to stop what you're doing. Wallace's voice was careful. I want you to understand that it's complicated. I don't want Derek in prison. I don't want any of this to be what it is. He looked back at the window. I just wanted someone to bring me food without making me feel like a problem. Evan sat with that for a while. You were never a problem, he said finally. You are the point of everything. His father didn't answer. That night, after Wallace was asleep, Evan sat at the small desk with his laptop and the bank documents and Patricia's preliminary legal brief, and he worked through the counterattack methodically. The guardianship petition would be challenged on 3 grounds: the conflict of interest in the filing attorney, the clean cognitive evaluation, and the 11-year clean medical history. The APS complaint would be countered with the transaction records, the padlock, and Evelyn's account of the 8 visits. Patricia said she expected both to be dismissed or dismissed pending full hearing within 2 weeks, but Evan wasn't thinking about the legal response. He was thinking about his father's face when he said it's complicated. He was thinking about Sandra sitting across from an old man who had been isolated for 2 years, planting exactly the right doubts in exactly the right places. He picked up the phone and called Patricia. I need something else, he said. I need to find someone in Millhaven who saw what was happening to my father. Someone who documented it, who has dates and specifics. Not Evelyn's memory. Something written down. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Why? Because Derek and Sandra are going to claim my father is confused. That he imagines things that he misremembers, that he's susceptible to suggestion. I need a record that existed before I arrived. Something that proves the pattern was observable from the outside. He paused. They've had 2 years to build their version of this story. I need the other version to be equally documented. Then find it, Patricia said. Because if it exists, it changes everything. He spent the next morning making calls to the men's breakfast group at Wallace's church, to 2 neighbors he hadn't spoken to yet, to the pharmacist who had filled Wallace's prescriptions for a decade. And then he drove to Evelyn Marsh's house and knocked on the door and asked the question he should have asked on the first night. Evelyn, he said, did you keep any record of the times my father came to your door? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, give me a minute. She went back into the house. She came back with a small address book. She held it out to him. The first entry was from 8 months ago. Wallace Holt, Okatiti Tunnel 14, 7 p.m. Hungry. Thin. Bruise on forearm. Said he hadn't eaten since morning. There were 16 entries. The 16 entries in Evelyn's address book covered 8 months. They were written in a small, disciplined hand-date time condition, what Wallace said, what Evelyn gave him. She had written them the same way she kept track of her grocery list or her annual doctor appointments, because she was the kind of person who recorded things, not because she thought she would ever need to use them. I kept thinking I should call someone, she told Evan, sitting at her kitchen table with the address book between them. I kept thinking he'd ask for help if he really needed it. But every time I saw him, he said he was fine. And he said it in that way he has, where you feel like you'd be doing something cruel to push past it. She looked at the table. I should have pushed past it anyway. This is going to help him, Evan said. More than you know. He photographed every page. He asked Evelyn if she would be willing to give a formal statement, and she said yes without hesitating. He called Patricia that afternoon. Patricia filed the supplemental response to the APS complaint. The next morning, Evelyn's log 16 documented instances over 8 months. Dr. Carver's 11-year clean medical history, the bank records showing systematic diversion of funds, the pawn shop documentation of the tool sale, and a copy of the pantry lock photograph Evan had taken on his first night back in Millhaven. The APS case against Evan was dismissed 3 days later. The investigating worker submitted a finding of no credible basis for the referred concerns. The guardianship petition remained pending, but Patricia's challenge was in motion. The conflict of interest in the filing attorney's relationship with the fraudulent notary was documented and submitted. The court scheduled a full competency hearing 6 weeks out, by which time Patricia told Evan they would have everything they needed. Evan spent 2 days talking to people in Millhaven. He spoke with Pastor Gerald Watts, who had known Wallace for 15 years. Gerald ran a men's breakfast group at the community church, 5 or 6 regulars every Thursday at 7, coffee and conversation. Wallace had attended without fail for over a decade. He had stopped 6 months ago. I assumed it was his knees, Gerald said. He looked ashamed of it. I called once, maybe twice. He said he was fine, just tired. I didn't push. He pressed his hands together on the table. I should have driven over and knocked on the door. I know that now. Were you close to Derek? He's in the congregation, not the most active member. I didn't have any reason to think Gerald stopped. No, that's not honest. There were things I let myself not think about because they were complicated, and I didn't want to get involved in a family matter. He looked at Evan steadily. I'll do whatever I can now. Whatever you need. Margaret Keyes had lived 2 doors east of the family home for 22 years. She remembered Sandra's car appearing during daytime hours when Derek was at work 3-4 times a week for months. She remembered not seeing Wallace outside for weeks at a time. She remembered once seeing him at the side gate looking into the yard as if he wanted to come out and then turning back inside. He used to work on that fence every spring, she said. Every spring, he'd be out there for a week, replacing posts, fixing the cross rails. 3 springs in a row now, he hasn't touched it. Ray Hollis, who lived across the street, had noticed the lights. That back bedroom used to have the light on in the evenings, he said. Then for months, it was dark. I thought maybe he was going to bed earlier. But it was winter and dark at 4 o'clock, and it bothered me. None of them had said anything. Each had a reason that made sense in isolation. He values his privacy. It's a family matter, he said he was fine. But taken together, Evelyn's 16 entries, Gerald's unanswered calls, Margaret's car sightings, Ray's lights, the pattern was not ambiguous. The pattern was visible. The community had seen it and had made collectively the calculation that it was not their place to intervene. Evan sat with that on the drive back to the motel. He thought about what his own calculation had been. Deposits going out, phone calls every few weeks. He's fine, he always says he's fine. Visiting 4 months ago, 6 months before that. Each choice individually defensible. Together 1.5 years of a man getting thinner in a room no one checked on. He brought the full file to Patricia's office in Cincinnati at the end of the week. She reviewed the witness statements with the precision of someone assembling something that needed to hold under pressure. This is enough, she said. The bank records, the POA documentation, the cognitive evaluation, Evelyn's log, the pawn shop, the neighbor's accounts. She looked up. I can file criminal charges, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, elder abuse, and unauthorized use of a power of attorney. All three are felony level under Kentucky statute. Do you want to proceed? Yes, Evan said. The DA will likely add to the list as they review, and Sandra's name will be on the filing alongside Derek's. She paused. Is your father ready for that? Evan thought about what Wallace had said. I want people to know. Not just you, I want people to know what happened. He is, Evan said. But I want to do something else first. Something that lets him be in the room for it. That lets the town hear it. Patricia looked at him. There's a community hall in Millhaven, Evan said. My parents used to go to the harvest dinners there. I want to arrange a dinner. I want to invite everyone in town. Officially, it's a belated birthday celebration for my father. He turned 75 in January, the month he ate porridge alone. He paused. And I want to stand up and read from his notebook. I want Millhaven to hear what happened to him in his own words. Patricia was quiet for a moment. You know Derek and Sandra will hear about it, she said. I'm counting on it, Evan said. I'm going to invite them. Sandra showed up at Evelyn Marsh's door on a Tuesday morning with an envelope and a careful smile. Evelyn had been expecting something. Not this exactly, but something. She let Sandra in and offered coffee, which Sandra declined, and they sat at the kitchen table that Evelyn had been sitting at across from Wallace for 35 years. Sandra set the envelope on the table between them. I know things have been difficult, she said. Her voice was warm and measured, the kind of warmth that comes from practice. This has been hard on everyone. But Wallace is a private man. He wouldn't want his personal difficulties aired publicly. She pushed the envelope slightly toward Evelyn. I thought maybe you'd consider letting this settle within the family. For his sake. Evelyn looked at the envelope. She did not touch it. How much is in there, she asked. Enough to show our appreciation for everything you've done for Wallace over the years. 2,000, Evelyn asked. 3. Sandra smiled carefully. Does the amount matter? It does, Evelyn said. Because I want to tell Evan exactly how much you thought my silence was worth. Sandra's smile did not break, but something behind it did. She stood. She took the envelope back. I hope you'll reconsider, she said. Think about what this kind of attention does to an old man. Think about whether you're protecting him or just making yourself feel better. Evelyn stood too. She was 5'1" and she looked Sandra Holt in the eye from across her kitchen table. I kept a record, she said. 16 entries. Dates, times, what he looked like, what he said. I kept it because I didn't know what else to do, and I didn't want to forget. She picked up her phone from the counter. I'm calling Evan now. You can see yourself out. Evan was at the motel when the call came. He drove to Evelyn's immediately and sat with her while she gave a formal statement. Time, what was said, the envelope, the amount Sandra had offered. Evelyn signed the statement. Evan photographed it and sent it to Patricia. Patricia called within 20 minutes. Witness intimidation, she said. That's a separate charge. I'm notifying the DA now. This just became a stronger criminal case. A pause. Sandra overreached. Derek came to the motel that same evening. Evan let him in. They sat across from each other at the small table by the window. And for the first time in this whole thing, Derek looked like what he was, a man who had done something very bad and was starting to understand the weight of it. I want to talk about Sandra, Derek said. I'm listening. She was the one who moved the money. The boutique, the accounts, that was her. I let it happen because I thought I told myself he stopped. He pressed his hands flat on the table. I told myself it was compensation. For being the one who stayed. For being the one who dealt with everything while you built your life somewhere else. He looked at Evan. That's what I told myself. And Dad eating porridge on his birthday, Evan said. What did you tell yourself about that Derek was quiet? He was begging from the neighbor Derek. He believed I'd forgotten about him. You told him that. I know what I told him. What I can't work out, Evan said, is whether you believed it. Whether you actually convinced yourself that I had stopped caring, so the lie was almost true. Or whether you knew exactly what you were doing and did it anyway because it was convenient. He looked at his brother. Which is it? Derek did not answer. Wallace was sitting in the armchair on the other side of the room watching the window. He had been quiet the whole time Derek was there. Now he spoke without turning his head. You told me he stopped loving me, Wallace said. Did you believe that when you said it? Or were you hoping I would believe it so I wouldn't call him? Derek said nothing. I thought so, Wallace said. He went back to looking at the window. Derek left 20 minutes later. He walked out without saying goodbye to his father. Patricia filed the criminal charges the next morning, financial exploitation, of a vulnerable adult, elder abuse, unauthorized use of a power of attorney, and mortgage fraud, against both Derek and Sandra jointly. For Sandra alone, the DA added a witness intimidation charge based on Evelyn's statement. The charges were served the following afternoon. Evan learned this by phone while he was sitting with his father at the diner. Wallace was eating a grilled cheese sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup, and when Evan told him the charges had been filed, Wallace set down the spoon and looked at his soup for a moment. Will Derek go to prison? He asked. I don't know, Evan said. That depends on a lot of things. Wallace nodded slowly. I don't want him to, he said. I just wanted him to stop. He picked up his spoon again. He finished the soup. That evening, Evan went to the community hall and spoke with the manager about booking the space. He explained what the dinner was for. The manager knew Wallace had known him for 20 years and agreed without asking about deposits or paperwork. Just let me know how many people, she said. We'll make sure it's right. On the way back to the motel, Evan stopped at a stationery shop that was still open. He bought a small wooden stand, the kind used for displaying photographs or signs. He thought about the notebook in his jacket pocket. He thought about the birthday entry. No birthday should pass without something to celebrate. The porridge was still warm. When he got back to the motel, his father was already in bed, the television on low, the room quiet and warm. Evan sat at the small desk for a long time making a list of names to invite. He called Evelyn last. I'm doing something, he said. For my father. I want you to be there. Of course, she said immediately. What do you need me to do? Nothing, Evan said. Just come, and be ready to stand up if you want to. The Millhaven Community Hall had been built in 1963 and had hosted everything from school board meetings to the county spelling bee to the memorial service for a firefighter who died in 1991. Its walls had absorbed 40 years of folding chairs and casseroles and arguments about zoning, and it smelled of old wood and industrial cleaner and faintly of the ham that had been cooked there for every Thanksgiving potluck since 1978. Evan booked it for the first Saturday of the following month. He called it a birthday dinner for Wallace Holt. Belated Wallace had turned 75 in January, and he spread the word through the church bulletin and through the network of people he'd been speaking to all week. By Wednesday 63, people had said they would come. He told no one else what he planned to do there. Sandra's attorney filed an emergency motion 48 hours after the invitations went out. The motion alleged that the event was designed to create public prejudice against the defendants in a pending criminal matter, and asked the court to enjoin Evan from holding it. Patricia responded with a single-page brief, pointing out that a man's birthday dinner was not a legal proceeding, and that no statute in Kentucky prohibited a family from celebrating an elderly man's 75th birthday in a community hall. The motion was denied the same afternoon, Derek called. "If you're planning to use that dinner to embarrass us publicly, I'm planning to honor my father," Evan said. "If that embarrasses you, then I'd say that's your answer." He spent the week on logistics. He ordered food from the diner where his father had eaten his first full meal after leaving the family home. The owner, a woman named Carol, insisted on doing the whole spread herself and refused to charge full price. She said, "Just make sure Wallace sits up front." He brought Wallace to the community hall 2 nights before the dinner to see the setup. They walked through the long room slowly, the chairs arranged at round tables, the kitchen at the back. Still quiet, the small lectern at the front that Evan had borrowed from the church. Wallace moved through the room with the deliberate care of a man testing familiar ground. He stopped at one of the side windows and looked out at the parking lot. "Your mother and I came here for every harvest dinner," he said. "For about 30 years, she always made the same thing, apple cake with brown sugar topping. People always asked her for the recipe and she always said she'd forgotten it." A pause. She hadn't forgotten it. She just liked being asked. Evan smiled. "I remember that cake. She would have been furious about all of this," Wallace said. He was still looking at the window. Not at you, at Derek, at Sandra, at herself probably for not seeing it coming. He turned. She also would have baked something for the table. She'd say a dinner isn't a dinner without something from the family. Evan thought about that for a moment. Then he called Carol and asked if she could add an apple cake with brown sugar topping to the menu. He described it from memory. Carol said she'd figure it out. The night before the dinner, after Wallace was asleep, Evan drove to the community hall alone. The manager had left the lights on for him. He walked through the empty room and stood at the lectern for a long time. He placed Wallace's notebook on the wooden stand he'd bought at the stationery shop. He opened it to a page near the middle, not the birthday entry, not yet. Just a random entry from December. He read the words his father had written alone in a cold room with a burned-out porch light, and he stood there in the empty hall until he was sure he could read them aloud without his voice failing. He wasn't sure it was possible, but he was going to try. He closed the notebook and picked it up and held it for a moment. Then he put it back on the stand and turned off the lights and drove back to the motel. The dinner began at 6 on Saturday evening. The hall filled quickly, 60 people in folding chairs at round tables. The lights warmed the food from Carol's diner spread along the side tables in covered pans. Evan had arranged a small vase of flowers for each table. He had asked Pastor Gerald to say a brief blessing. Wallace arrived early. He wore the blue cardigan. He had shaved carefully and combed his hair, and he moved through the room with a dignity that had not been diminished by anything that had happened to him. People who knew him came to him immediately, embracing him, holding his hands, asking how he was doing with an earnestness that was different from the careful politeness of the last few years. He answered each person with patience and a kind of quiet gratitude that Evan watched from across the room. Derek and Sandra arrived 20 minutes after the dinner started. They came in quietly, found seats near the back, and kept their expressions neutral. Evan had known they would come. He had expected Sandra to stay away and Derek to come alone or neither of them, but both were here, and that told him something about what they believed the dinner was and what they hoped to do about it. Let them hope. Carol's food was exactly right. There was more than enough of it. The apple cake came out near the end of the meal, golden and fragrant, and when it was placed in front of Wallace, he looked at it for a long moment without speaking. "Does it taste right?" Evan asked. Not quite, Wallace said. He ate a piece, then another. But it's close. She figured most of it out. Evan looked at his father eating cake at the table where his mother's family had come for 30 years, and he thought, whatever happens next, this is already worth it. This specific moment, this cake, this room, this man eating without apology, was worth every mile and every document and every terrible thing that had needed to be said out loud. Then Pastor Gerald nodded at him from across the room. Evan stood. The room went quiet when Evan stood. He had not planned what he was going to say. That was unusual for him. He was a man who planned things, but some things he had decided should not be rehearsed. You could rehearse for a presentation. You could not rehearse for this. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, he said. His voice was steady. My father doesn't make a lot of noise about himself. He never has. He worked his whole life without asking for much recognition, and when things got hard, he wrote them down instead of talking about them, because he didn't want to be a burden to anyone. He paused. I found out what that looked like up close these past few weeks, and I want to share it with you tonight with his permission. He reached for the notebook on the small stand beside the lectern. Wallace was at the head table 10 feet away. He was watching Evan with his hands folded in front of him. He nodded very slightly. Evan opened the notebook. October 14th, he said. 7 months ago. Sandra put a lock on the pantry today. She says it is for organization. I asked Derek about it, and he said Sandra runs the house now and I should let her. I did not argue. I never argue. The room was very still. November 3rd. Tried to call Evan 4 times today. Each time it says the call failed. Maybe the signal is bad. Maybe his number changed. Derek said last month that Evan is very busy at work and prefers text messages now. I don't know how to send a text. He could hear someone near the back of the room shift in their chair. December 19th. Sandra brought me rice for dinner. I asked if there was something else. She said rice is fine for older people who don't move much. I ate the rice. I am still hungry. The porch light burned out, and I cannot reach the fixture anymore. I did not ask Sandra to replace it because I did not want to bother her. He looked up briefly. The 60 faces in the room were turned toward him with an attention that felt like something held carefully, like something that might break if moved too quickly. He looked back down. February 3rd. He steadied his breath. My tools are gone. Sandra said they needed to go into storage because there is not enough room in the garage. I did not ask which storage. They were in the garage for 30 years. I built the back fence with those tools. I built this house with those tools. But I did not argue. Someone near the side wall made a sound that was not quite a word. March 15th. Went to Evelyn's tonight, the 3rd time this month. She handed me the bowl without me asking. She just saw my face and she knew. I told her I was fine. She said she knew. We did not talk about it more than that. I do not want her to worry. He turned the page. May 2nd. He stopped for a moment. Restarted. I am ashamed to write this. I am very hungry today. I asked Sandra for something other than rice, and she said I eat more than a man my age needs. I said I was still hungry after meals. She said it is probably because I am confusing thirst for hunger. I am not confused. I have been hungry before. This is different. He heard Evelyn Marsh make a sound. A small sound. He turned forward in the notebook to January. He found the entry. He had read it 4 times since he found it. He was not sure he could get through it. He was going to try. January 14th, he said. My father's birthday. He could feel the room lean in. It is my birthday today. I went to the kitchen this morning to make breakfast, and the pantry was locked. I found rice left over from yesterday in a pot on the stove. I made porridge. I ate it alone at the kitchen table. He stopped. He looked at the page. He kept going. No birthday should pass without something to celebrate. The porridge was still warm. The room was completely silent. Evan closed the notebook. He set it back on the stand. He looked out at the 60 people in the room, people who had grown up alongside his father, who had eaten at this table with him for 30 years, who had waved to him on his way to the hardware store and asked after his health, and nodded when he said he was fine. And he said, "My father wrote in that notebook alone, in a room with a burned-out porch light and a locked pantry door and a phone that didn't work. He wrote because he had no one else to talk to. And he wrote about each of you not by name, but in everything he chose not to say. Every time he said he was fine when he wasn't. Every time he chose not to bother someone. Every time he walked to Evelyn's door instead of calling his son because he thought his son had stopped caring about him. A silence that was not comfortable. I sent $3,000 every month," Evan said. "Every month for 4 years, automatic, never missed. And none of it reached him." He heard a sharp exhale somewhere near the back of the room. Then Evelyn Marsh stood up. She was small, and she stood slowly the way people do when their joints are less cooperative than their intentions, and she said, "I kept a record. Every time Wallace came to my door. 16 times. I have the dates written down." She looked around the room. "I should have called someone. I didn't because I thought it wasn't my place. I want to say to Wallace that I am sorry it took me so long to understand that it was." Wallace looked at Evelyn. He nodded once, the same small nod he had given Evan. It was enough. Pastor Gerald stood. "I should have driven over when he stopped coming to Thursday breakfast," he said. "I called twice. He said he was fine. I believed him because it was easier to believe him." He sat back down. Margaret Keyes stood. "I saw things," she said. She sat down without saying what they were. She didn't need to. Ray Hollis stood. "The light in his back room was off all winter," he said. "I noticed. I didn't say anything." He sat down. Evan looked at the back of the room. Derek was sitting very still. Sandra's face had the look of a person who had built something over a long time and was watching it dismantle itself in real time. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. After a moment, Derek stood up. He did not say anything. He walked toward the exit. Sandra followed. The room turned to watch them go, not loudly, not with any visible gesture, just the slow swivel of attention that was more damning than anything anyone could have said out loud. The door closed behind them. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Evan looked at his father across the table. He had rehearsed nothing. He found that he had nothing to rehearse. "I should have come sooner," he said. His voice did something at the end of the sentence that he had not planned and could not stop. "I'm sorry, Dad." Wallace reached across the table. He covered Evan's hand with both of his. His hands were warm and the grip was steady, and he held on for a long moment without saying anything. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The room around them gradually found its breath again. People began talking quietly to each other, to Wallace, to Evan. Carol brought more coffee. Someone moved chairs together. The apple cake was sliced and passed around. Evan sat beside his father for the rest of the evening. He did not move from that chair. He watched people come to Wallace and hold his hand and say the things they wished they had said earlier, and he watched his father receive them, gracious and patient, and exactly himself, not diminished by what had been done to him, not restored by it either. Just present, just here, just eating cake and drinking coffee and talking about the weather and the harvest fair and the fence that needed painting in the spring. At the end of the night, after everyone had gone and the hall was being stacked and folded, Wallace picked up the notebook from the stand by the lectern. He held it for a moment, weighing it the way you hold something before deciding what to do with it. Then he set it back down on the stand. "I don't think I need this anymore," he said. The legal process moved more slowly than Evan would have preferred, but it moved. Sandra entered a guilty plea in the 6th week after the dinner. 2 counts financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and witness intimidation. She received 18 months suspended, 3 years of probation community service, and a court-ordered restitution schedule that would take several years to fulfill. Her boutique was already closing. The $180,000 that had seeded it was gone, and the creditors were in line. Derek's case took longer. He contested several of the charges initially, which Evan had expected. But Patricia was patient and precise, and the evidence was complete, and in the end, Derek accepted a plea: unauthorized use of a power of attorney, and 1 count of elder neglect, both felonies reduced to misdemeanor level in exchange for full cooperation with the financial accounting. He received a suspended sentence, 2 years of probation, and a restitution order alongside Sandra's. The fraudulent POA was declared void by the court in the 7th week. With it went Derek's authority as authorized agent. The purchase and sale agreement he had signed for the family property was invalidated. The developer's attorney had seen this coming and had already withdrawn. Cornerstone Capital's mortgage claim was challenged on the grounds of the fraudulent POA. Their attorney and Patricia's spent 4 months sorting it out, and eventually a settlement was reached in which Derek and Sandra were required to contribute personal assets toward the debt. It did not fully clear the obligation, but the portion remaining was manageable, and the family property, the house Wallace Holt had built in 1984 on 2 acres of land east of the grain cooperative in Mill Haven, Kentucky, was restored to Wallace's sole and unencumbered ownership. Patricia sent Evan a brief email when the final order was filed. It said, "Your father's house is his again." Evan read that email 3 times. He spoke with Patricia in person at the end of the process in her Cincinnati office. She told him that Wallace had called her office once during the proceedings on his own, without Evan knowing to ask about Derek's case. She had told him what she could. He had asked whether Derek might lose his house. She had said she didn't know. Wallace had said, "I hope he doesn't. I hope he just learns something." "He's a remarkable man," Patricia said. "I know," Evan said. Gary from the pawn shop drove out to the Mill Haven Motor Inn on a Tuesday afternoon with all 14 pieces of Wallace's DeWalt tool set in their original cases, cleaned and oiled. He refused payment. He shook Wallace's hand with both of his and said, "I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions when she came in." Wallace said, "You didn't know. Not everyone who sells tools is in trouble." "No," Gary said. "But you don't forget a face when something feels wrong. I should have paid attention to what I felt." Wallace put the tools in the back of the car himself. He lifted the cases without asking for help. Moving to Cincinnati was Wallace's own decision. Evan had not asked. He had mentioned once carefully that the guest room in his apartment was large enough, and the neighborhood was quiet, and there were 2 diners within walking distance. He had left the rest unsaid. A week later, Wallace said, "I'll come for a month. Then we'll see." He had been there 6 months when they drove back to Mill Haven for the annual harvest fair. The town looked the same from the highway. The grain cooperative, the water tower, the church steeple, everything in the same place it had been since Evan was a child, oriented around the center of the county like things that expect to remain. He parked on the main street and they walked. People stopped to greet Wallace on the sidewalk. A woman Evan didn't know came up and hugged his father for a long time without saying anything. The man who ran the hardware store came out and shook Wallace's hand and asked about his knees. Evelyn Marsh was at the craft table near the main tent entrance, and she stood when she saw them coming and held both of Wallace's hands for a moment. "You look better," she said. "Cincinnati agrees with me," Wallace said. "The coffee is stronger." "Is that it?" "That's most of it," he said. They sat together for the opening ceremony. Evelyn and Wallace and Evan on the bench at the edge of the fair, the announcer saying the same things he said every year into a microphone that buzzed slightly in the autumn air. The apple trees in the orchard behind the fairground had been harvested that week. You could smell them from the bench. Wallace ordered a full plate from the food tent. Pork chops, mashed potatoes, green beans, cornbread, the same thing he had eaten at the motel diner on his first night, back when Evan had sat across from him and watched him eat 3 helpings and said nothing. He ate every bite. He did not rush. He did not check whether anyone was watching or whether there would be more. Evan watched him eat. After the plate was cleared, Wallace set his fork down. He picked up his napkin, wiped his mouth carefully, and set it on the table. He looked out at the fairground, the booths, the people, the October light that came in low and golden over the Kentucky hills. He said, "The porridge was always enough. It just tasted better when you weren't eating alone." Evan did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I'm not going anywhere, Dad." "I know," Wallace said. He was still looking at the fairground. "That's what I mean." They sat there for a long time, long enough for the light to shift and the crowd to thin and the last of the apple cake to be sold from the bake sale table and the announcer to wind up his microphone cord for the day. They sat until Evelyn said she had to get home before it got dark, and they walked her to her car, and they stood in the parking lot for a moment after she left. The notebook was in a drawer in Cincinnati, closed. It had not been opened since the night of the dinner, when Wallace set it back on the stand and said he didn't need it anymore. He didn't need it anymore. He had somewhere to put the things he used to write down. He had someone to eat with in the mornings, and someone to call from the next room when something on the news didn't make sense, and someone to drive him back to Millhaven when the harvest fair came around. He had the tools in the spare room and the house in Kentucky that was his again, and the bench by the fairground where he and his wife had sat for 30 years. He had enough. He had, in fact, more than enough. He just hadn't been eating alone. If you've ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken for someone you loved or someone you just knew, it's never too late to say something. Leave a comment. Tell us what you think Wallace and Evan did right and what you would have done differently. And if this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it today.